Hello, I'm TJ Bartczak.
And I'm Casey Brazeal.
And this is Work Friends. Work Friends is a podcast where we'll look at typical water cooler conversation, funny stories, and hopefully get some interesting topics to talk to that one person in the office that you seem to have nothing in common with.
In the format of this, it's going to be maybe two topics and a quick hit one. We're going to start right with kind of the name and the idea of Work Friends and all of the odd social interactions that exist around work, like, you know, your Christmas party, bull sessions of after work stuff, and just kind of like digging into that thing, like the work friend versus real friend. How far do you let your colleagues into your life? I guess a good opening kind of salvo question into this is like, are you Facebook friends with your work coworkers? Does that feel, is it always kind of an awkward thing, you know, like, can I be Facebook friends with my boss?
Yeah, absolutely. I think me and you have a slightly different approach to this. I am 100% no separate lives, no Facebook friends, no, like, you do not get to know what I did on Friday night, you do not get to do any of those things. I'm also pretty bad at casual conversation. I dread it, and I hate small talk, and that whole, hey, how's your kids? But yeah, in general, for the listeners, we have worked together.
Yeah.
You tended to be a little more on the social side, in my opinion.
Absolutely.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
Absolutely. No. And it is awkward for me also. Like, I'm not going to pretend that, like, I want to be Facebook friends with everybody. But yeah, I think it also is, like, interesting because it depends what your role is, right? So, like, in the world of marketing today, and, like, so we have both had various jobs of various types. We are work friends. We work together at Foreign Foods for a while. That's how we come to know each other. But my gigs have been more on the marketing side, and kind of because of that, in a weird way, like, understanding how social media things work is a credential. Maybe it shouldn't be. Maybe it's stupid that it is. I certainly hope that I'd never, like, lost a job because I had, like, 300 LinkedIn connections instead of 10,000 or whatever other stupid social metrics there are out there. But I always felt like I kind of had to show cultural fluency with these things. So, you know, yes, podcasts, yes, social.
Absolutely. What kind of marketing person doesn't, you know, have a Facebook and doesn't allow their coworkers to see their Facebook? There's a trust element kind of built to it.
Totally. And I didn't do it for everybody, and I definitely didn't want to, like, didn't start doing it until I started getting marketing gigs. So, like, I had a purchasing gig. We both have a background in the food industry. I used to work as a purchasing manager for Enjoy Life Foods. And there, I think I rejected whatever is the nomenclature for whatever platform for all social media of all coworkers.
You actually rejected them. Because I do the let it sit, and if you look at my Facebook right now, there's probably about 40 of just, like, unanswered
That's
requests.
not anything, though. It's they don't.
What if they find out?
They don't see you rejecting them.
Well, if they try, they can friend you again. It's not a friend pending. I'm not a social media expert in this relationship. You're the marketing guy.
Following may have to clear this up for us, but I feel like, yeah, I don't know to what degree, how easy it would be to find out if your friend request, LinkedIn request, Twitter, well, Twitter is easier, if you can never know that you were ignored, or if it's just like, because that's why it's ignore and not reject.
Right.
Because you're not.
Oh, there's an ignore option.
Well, those are the two buttons. There's not a button that's like, tell this person that they are a jerk, which I think is, like, done very purposefully, like, to feed their brain.
There should be a no, they get an email, this person does not want to be friends with you.
So clearly your style on this is to try and just, you know, keep my potatoes and my meat separate of, like, real friend, work friend. But, okay, in the real world where you can isolate yourself from the social interaction of work, but you only to such a degree, you know, only so far. Like, what is your, and I want to have like a unified theory of office parties, you know, like a central, like, Casey's best practices on these. I only know what I like and or hate about
I'm probably the wrong person to ask as the person who kind of rejects a lot of stuff. Well, let's start here. So there's the general topics to avoid, right? So money, sex, politics, religion.
Mm-hmm.
Anything else on your list? I mean, look.
Totally. Like, I mean, why do you even have to say sex? Really, it's just it's basically politics, religion are the two that folks seem to want to wedge in, and some things end up being political that you don't think of as political when you bring them up.
Recently, I found the that's how Trump became the national candidate is becoming like a nomenclature for examples of irrational behavior, which is like a conversation not about politics at all has turned into a conversation about politics, and it'll be a room of 10 people going, yeah, and then there's one dude in the corner like, this is awkward because I'm that one guy.
Totally. Or maybe, you know, like, there's I often find in the awkward conversation, and this is not just at work, but it is often at work, where it's like, there is the silent disagreeer who's like, the loud people, or the senior people, or, and that like, the boss's idea is this, I will sit on this. But, I mean, I want to actually specifically talk about work events, just briefly. This has never been my role to be the work event person, but I feel like these things, these like
social
office
events,
parties, like whatever parties, if you're at like a very established company, they do the same thing every year. There's like kind of an understood, this is the effort that's put into it, blah blah blah. But I felt like other places that it was always, the idea always started out as something simple. You know, we'll go to a bar after work, and that will be where we'll do our end of the year, blah, blah, blah. Or we'll, you know, have a couple of the employees' families, and it always, like, slowly creeped out more and more, and was, like, more all-encompassing, and the person whose responsibility it was, suddenly it was, like, their main project, and it's, like, you know, drawing everyone into its orbit to the point where, like, the, you know, general manager of the U.S. office is taking off the afternoon to buy potato chips or something, and it's like,
yeah, I mean, in general, obviously most offices have, you know, work, you know, cohorts, right? There's the sales team, there's the, you know, development team, whatever it may be. Those people, if they go hang out, that's normal, right? They have enough in common, they have similar stories, similar kind of pain points, X, Y, Z. As soon as there's cross-function or cross, you know, especially leadership up on a vertical level, that's where things get complicated, because not only is there less in common and more awkwardness, there's also that obligation to invite the other people for fear of, you know, oh, you left out this group or these people or whatever it may be.
Yeah, totally. It's funny how it's very unlike the high school who is the coolest thing, because it's kind of like set up in a upside down backwards situation where it's like there's already a hierarchy, and it's not an imagined hierarchy.
Right, we all
know. It's the hierarchy of the working world, and like it still has that terrible high school thing that often happens at, like, you know, when you're all studying for a test, and I'm sure this was you. There's that kid who's like bragging to all the other kids about how little they studied.
Oh yeah,
and it's like an instant competition for like who did things the worst. And it's funny how that still happens in the working world, even though that's an obvious self-sabotage. You know, like maybe it's like some weird double reverse strategy to like be like, hey, Joe coworker, I'm not threatening to you. I don't even try that hard. But like, it's a very human thing to downplay one's efforts, and that happens in work situations in a weird way. Like, Like the Jim character on The Office. Do not have any love for that character. Like, I much prefer, like, the Parks and Rec. What's the name of the main character, the woman of Parks and Rec?
Leslie Knope.
Like Leslie Knope,
yeah.
right? Sincere, trying very hard. If I fail, it was not because I didn't, break the pit. Like,
yeah, I mean, the humble brag's a real thing because it's
real.
It's the
So
only
real.
because obviously the opposite is like the straight brag is
which is yet
much
worse. Yet worse. I concede.
But genuine, like, how else do you talk about like successes and these sort of things without being like, I know I just landed this huge deal on the sales team. It wasn't me, right? Like,
totally,
there's a way to brag about it without being that total asshole.
Absolutely, and I think we're going to fall to sports metaphors continually.
Sure.
Where this has been mastered, the like bragging thing is in the post-game press conference, right? Because you can't be Kanye West on a basketball team, right? Because the other people around, there's so much pressure for you to be nice, and the script has been so written for you of like all of the cliches that you can use. The cliche is your friend, as they say in Bull Durham. And I think that's true in real work.
I mean, cliches exist for a reason because they work. I also hate them.
In some cases, they're true.
Oh, yeah.
What do you hate about them?
What do I hate about it? Because they feel ingenuine. I've heard enough managers say like catch as catch can, like that it doesn't mean anything, and it doesn't have any import, it doesn't have any value. Like, cool, I'll go as someone who's lived in the sales world my whole kind of career. Great, awesome. The customer's always right. Great. It's straight in one ear, not the other. I don't know what that means anymore.
Totally, because if you are saying a cliche, there's a danger that you don't actually think that or haven't even really thought about what that means. Because you're like, there's a safety in the commonness of this phrase. Like, if you say to me a cliche, if you're a manager and you say a cliche to me, but then I can see through, that you bring a deep conviction through it. If you can put it in your own words in some way, at least I know you actually think that. Not,
100%.
Oh, this is just a thing that I'm saying so that you will get out of my office and I can do the things I want to do and I can stop managing you, Or if you're a direct report to me, same thing. Like I think it is a universal work experience to be like in an interaction with a manager, looking for a way to come to a graceful end to that interaction so that you can go, do your own thing.
We're all just kind of bothering each other all day, for the most part. And once again, this is the cynical person who hates kind of small talk talking, but like, it for me, it is a lot of like, I'm putting up with this because I know I have to work with you on a project down the road, and I can't have you, ignore my request when I ask you to do something 3 days from now. So yeah, I'll put up with it, and be as genuine as I can.
And even in real interactions that need to happen, like the real work, like managing is work.
Right.
It's not.
Yes.
It's not the bullshit extra stuff like telling somebody what needs to happen, helping them figure out how to get from where they are to where that is, helping them anticipate roadblocks, helping them work through roadblocks that neither of you anticipate, whatever. Like, managing is work, but it's not always pleasant work, and sometimes we seek to, I got it, just let it go.
Yeah, there's a hard, the teach a man to fish cliche, to go back to that. But yeah, so I mean, I've managed a ton of people in my career, and there's plenty of times where I say, I can work with you on this and spend 2 hours working on it, or I can spend 10 minutes kind of doing it myself. And you have to kind of do that math, and it's less about the work at that point. It's more about egos, because anytime you step in with somebody, you're going to be, no one wants to be like, hey, step back. Like, let me fail. Let's to a certain extent, which as a manager is really, really hard to let someone fail, but it's necessary. It's a necessary evil.
Well, yeah, and it's also like, let's say, if it's some central task that someone has to learn, like, you have to pay that cost at some point of them learning it. right? Like, even, you may flatter yourself that you can get it done in 2 minutes. One thing I would say back to that is we always underestimate how fast it is for us to do things in general. But even if there is a time savings there, like that might bite you later when you're like, today is the day I truly cannot help you because I am doing all these other things. Like, anything you can do to get somebody to competence is like just.
Well, that's to go back to the kind of small talk work friend conversation. If you don't have that relationship, good luck trying to do that, right? Like,
Totally.
what person you're managing is going to be like, yeah, this jerk who doesn't really talk to me, like, he's too busy for me. That's where dissension comes from. Like, that's where half of these, when the certain team goes out for drinks, all they do is complain about their manager because they don't feel
totally
true or not that they have their back.
And if you complain about your manager or you manage people that complain about you, like, obviously that's not the end of the world. Like, this is a very natural thing, and it's kind of like part and parcel, like, with any kind of hierarchical setup, right? Like, there's no getting away from it. And it's like, yeah, it could be a symptom of something bad, or it could be like, hey, man, you are somebody's boss, right? Some of the time they might think, wow, that guy's a great mentor to me.
Absolutely.
But some of the time, they're probably like, screw this guy, and you just have to hope that they take that little bit of failure and, it fuels them or whatever, and it doesn't, turn toxic.
Yeah, and I've always prescribed to the theory of, like, as long as, they know I mean well. Interesting, I should ask some of old employees whether this worked or not, but, like, managers that I've had that are jerks, as long as I know they are working hard, right, and putting in the time.
That's huge.
B, have the best interest of the company and not the individual in mind, and have my best interest in my career, not only with that company but long term. I'm much more willing to put up with stuff, but that all comes from that, like,
totally
genuine or fake casual conversation. Because if we talk about
does it all come from that?
Where else does it come from? Why else do you learn to trust those?
You could be being managed by some, like, robotic automaton, emotionless dude or woman, and if she, like, that this person puts in the time, that this person is capable and intelligent and gets stuff done. If they never say, how about the Cubs?
But they don't care about you.
They might not care about you.
They write that
You would probably prefer them to care about you, but I feel like this hypothetical automaton manager would be better than some managers I've had.
Would be much better than.
Well, that's what I'm saying.
Probably most managers are, but listen, we want people to care not because it's a real thing. We want people to care because it's a trust thing.
Yeah, I mean, trust is a real thing. I don't know, parsing the realness of trust is maybe beyond the purview of this Work Friends podcast. But I think that, yeah, I mean, small talk is one of the many weapons in the arsenal of a competent manager. Before we retire this topic or move on, something that strikes me and is so talking about, like, the difference between a work friend and a real friend. We are on opposite sides of the dividing line of 30 years old, but as one approaches his dotage, it gets harder to make real friends.
A nice award for that? Does something magically happen? Does a little stardust come down when I turn 30? Is that the magic?
No. Your knees get worse. Nobody whistles at you when you put on your bathing suit.
I'm gonna miss that.
Well, I imagine that you would. I mean, but what I mean is, like, when you're in college, when you're in high school, when you're just like a young person who's just graduated, it's much easier to pick up friends. And I think it's also easier, like, before you couple up too, because there's, like, you have less responsibilities in your life. I don't know, maybe it's, I'm not totally sure.
There's different expectations, right? Like,
maybe.
I expect my parents to act differently than my friends. The same way we're on the different line of, the grand old 30 divide, I have a 5-year-old son. As a parent, I have different expectations than the single employee, right? When you go to the bar after work and have a drink, casual, right? When I go, there's a little part of the back of my mind, like, why is he not at home with his kids reading books?
I should teach this kid some algebra right now. Right now!
But not only internally, but I feel that pressure externally. This, like, whether it's true or not, is that judgment of, like, I hope these people don't think I'm a bad father.
I spend probably 20% of the time that we are together just judging you and your father.
It's a big part of parenting. But oh man, when you go drop your kid off at school, the judgment that happens from other parents, true or not, it's probably 90% internal. They're probably not actually doing it, but
it's high school all over again.
You know, you better not wear sweats, like, God forbid. And, like, as someone who worked from home a fair amount, like, I would roll up in sweats someday because I'm going home, and, like, why do I need to put on pants?
Funny.
But that's a real thing, because you will get a ton of side-eye.
Oh, I don't
Maybe
know
that's just my son's school.
how we got here, but this was my original question was going to be, as you get older and it's a little bit harder to make friends, like, how, when... And is it worth it to, like, bring somebody over the line from work friend into, like, the orbit of real friend?
In this kind of personal opinion, I think it's when you cross the avoided topics line. Because once you can talk about money, politics, sex, at least kind of 2 of the 3, whatever of the 4, you know, a couple of those.
Those are the kind of things you might talk about with a proper friend.
Because, a lot of my proper friends I don't, but it's more of a qualifier, right? If I find out we have really different views on some of those key things, you're probably not going to get along with my quote-unquote real friend group. Right?
God, I wish I could find friends who are as cheap with money as I am. Because, like, I'm still looking for that friend.
But that's the thing, right? If you know, someone's coming in that's just like complete, I don't know, like extravagant
right, or vice versa,
political or whatever, super religious, and other friends, they're probably like they're gonna run out of kind of things to. So it's work friends that you either get drunk enough to break one of those lines with, or just kind of like through enough time and conversation, kind of. You can guess where they fall on some of those key things.
Totally. I would say there's got to be a certain baseline level of time. Like, this person, they seem cool. I hang out with them for a couple weeks, but let me see them do some stuff.
Have you done much interviewing? Have you interviewed people?
I've interviewed people a little bit. I've been interviewed infinitely, right?
So a big part, especially, this is probably specific to sales, but I guarantee you it happens everywhere else, is when I do interviews, when I interview people, I want to be able them to handle a 1-hour conversation that isn't forced, isn't me reading questions to them and them giving 3-sentence answers.
One time I was challenged is when I needed to raise sales approximately 20%.
Exactly.
And I did even more because my paper... Yeah.
Because if you can handle a conversation, then you probably can sell shit, right? If you can talk to me for an hour, you can probably talk to a buyer for an hour. B, I'm just judging, I'm straight up judging you on the non-avoidable work conversation. So I've hired plenty of people I never want to be friends with. I can tell pretty well by the end of 2 hours or 2 separate interviews or whatever it is, whether or not I would want to, when we go to a hotel on a sales trip, are we going to get drinks that night?
What's our second topic? Paradox of choice.
Sure. You want me to kind of jump? You let off the first one.
Yeah. Do you have like an opener?
I can bullshit it.
You're a person that, because you're so uninterested in other people, do you think you are capable of forming a question that will invoke in me?
Wow.
Like something. I think this is going to take a level of sympathy.
I don't care about anything other than myself.
Okay. Well,
so because I care about myself so much, I will do a great job.
Okay, good.
So the paradox of choice, kind of coined by a professor named Barry Schwartz, who wrote a book about the concept. And the concept goes, the U.S. civilization, capitalism, Western, markets are based on this concept of the more freedom we get, the more choice we have, the better our lives are, right?
Yeah, to a rational actor, that has to be true.
Absolutely. Game theory, whatever. What he's found is that is true to a very limited point. Above that point, there are a few things that happen. The example he uses is genes, right? When there was one pair of genes that existed out there, you weren't happy with them, but you didn't regret your decision because that was your point. Not only that, you blamed the gene makers. Why don't they make better genes?
Yeah.
Now, there are a million different types of genes, straight leg, skinny leg, whatever,
Yeah.
boot cut.
There's so many words referring to genes that I do not know what they
X,
mean.
Y, Z, that our fit and comfortability has absolutely gotten better, but we tend to leave the store a month down the road and regret that decision because we think, what if that boot cut was the right choice other than the straight leg, right? Like, what if, because we have this choice, we tend to regret our decisions and be more unhappy with the decisions we make. Not only that, the more choices we have, the less decision we actually make. They found that companies that give 40 different types of 401k options reduce their people of enrollment by 10%.
Because it's so intimidating.
Because it's so intimidating. If you give them 3, they will choose one. If you give them 40, we assume humans are rational actors. They will pick the best one for them. They don't. We don't. And not only that, we get depressed about the one we do because we think, oh, what if there was all these sort of other things? The long and short of it is that we believe that more choice will make our lives better, when in actuality, we are not capable decision makers as human beings filled with human error.
Yeah.
That we will often, more choice will actually make our lives worse.
Totally. Or is it even that we lack, is the problem that we lack the information, or is it, and I suspect it's more the second thing, is it more that even if we were to make the correct decision, we have a feeling that we might not have, and it's that fear of missing out, that FOMO feeling, is where the unhappiness is rooted. Like,
yeah, it's definitely more towards the latter, and there's a couple things at play in this. There's one, this is a whole other topic, but the Protestant ethic, which is what we're bore capitalism, right?
The Protestant, like, work ethic, like...
Well, Protestant, yeah, Martin Luther, his whole concept was you get what you deserve. So if you are rich, it's because God made you rich, right?
Divine providence. That kind of idea.
Yeah. Whereas before, it wasn't your fault if you're poor. Now, it's your fault if you're poor.
Or at least that's the construction.
So if you make a bad decision, you can only blame yourself. When there was one pair of jeans, you blame society, blame the jean manufacturers. You would never blame yourself. Now there's, we've given you all the choices of a million different iPhones. This is your fault if you pick the bad one. Totally. We've given you. Doctors is a great example, right? The old model was you walk in, say, I'm sick, they say, take this medicine. Now you walk in and they say, here's what we can do. We can give you surgery. Here's the risks and benefits of this. Here's the risks and benefits of this medication. Here's the risks and benefits of this one. It might make you better faster, but it also might have more side effects. You choose.
Totally.
And that's your fault if it goes wrong, not the professional who spent his entire career learning about this. Second level is just a simple generational piece of this, right? So because older generations had less choice, this gets into the millennial entitlement thing, all those sort of other pieces behind it, that people, because we have more choice, we tend to feel like we deserve the best option. When we don't get that best option, we blame ourselves, leading into a bunch of kind of other, you talk about depression raises in society, you can talk about levels of happiness between poor and rich communities, first and third world countries, all these sort of things. When you make them measure their own happiness, less choice tends to raise happiness versus more choice.
It's a fascinating thing because it's like, intuitively everybody's kind of experienced this, right? And obviously, when you say something like,
but
who
wants less choice? Give me less iPhones.
Totally. No. It's a hard thing to cop to. I mean, some people do. In fact, the 401k example is one that I think is instructive because I definitely have run into that. So I think like with like investments, 1% of people maybe are like always going to feel constrained. They're always going to feel like there's more things I want to pick from. Like there's some sommelier, there's some like subject expert who is so glad that they can get their own, polka dot, blah blah blah, special model. And I think that's true
the Android users.
For whatever it is, whether it's like
Sure.
investing, wine, a million other things. But I do think that like I have definitely been with like younger colleagues who are like just starting their investing and had them say to me, what is this? Like I have to learn these 5 things that I don't know about, and I feel guilty about not knowing about them because it reflects on me.
Seems like everyone else knows.
I'm not responsible or whatever. But yeah, so I think that in some cases we can catch ourselves knowing about it. But you're right. Generally, if I can get that word to come out, we don't, and we don't know ourselves. And just to like clarify, like when you're saying like if you choose the wrong one, it's your fault. If you don't become rich, it's your fault. Like that's what your mind is telling you. Obviously, it's not your fault. You can't be an expert on every single thing you ever make a decision on.
We have no one else to blame.
Yeah, it's just
you can't blame society. You can't blame manufacturers. You can't whatever it may be.
Knowing that in a vacuum with infinite time, there is like a best choice to make in many of these sometimes totally like inconsequential things. We make wrong choices. I think to tie this in more closely with work and our own particular work experiences, I think something fascinating is talking about Trader Joe's in the context of this. So, like, do you kind of know where I'm going with this thing?
I have no idea where you're
set
going.
it up for you.
Set it up.
Okay. So, we're in Chicago. Probably like your baseline. For many years, the grocery store in Chicago was Jewel, right? And Jewel is very much like whatever regional grocery store you might have. It's not your Whole Foods most premium. It's not your, cheapest, save more. It's just very down the middle.
Right. It's your Kroger, your Stop
store.
and Shop. You're a little bit lower than Safeway.
So it makes a good point of comparison to Trader Joe's because it's close to like what the old standard was. And a huge difference between Trader Joe's and Jewel is how many things are in a Trader Joe's. So if you go into a Trader Joe's, look at the individual sections, like look at how many hand soaps there are, or look at how many toilet papers there are, or look at how many, even things that have really boutique-y things like coffee, they have a very curated, limited selection, and
guess what? That is the same exact brand you will find in Jewel under a different label. Different discussion.
Yeah. Obviously, they do. But
that's part of the
have
point.
A strategy around.
You could make that same choice in Jewel,
but they purposefully limit the choices, and people love it, right? Like, obviously, not everyone in the world, their favorite grocery store is Trader Joe's. But if you look at grocery store ratings, Trader Joe's does very well.
Very high.
And they don't do very well because they have the best stuff, because they're not trying to be the Whole Foods, the premium, the blah, blah, blah. They don't do very well because they have the cheapest stuff. They do several things well, but one thing that people like is when they go to the toothpaste aisle, they're like, do I want that one or that one? And there's just 2 toothpastes there. They're not 1,000. And it's a funny thing to think that you would be made happier by this, but like it's borne out in working in the food industry. And when when we worked at Porn was not there, in part because they purposefully have a very limited selection.
Well,
they use
brand loyalty across any industry has dropped through the floor in the last 20, 30 years, right? Our parents bought the same cereal, bought the same brand of jeans, right? The Lee's generation, right? There isn't any brand, and that's part of the duty of choice, because we want this. We need more options. We want to be individuals, right? Gen X had this whole we want to be different by being individuals thing.
Yeah. Well, I think it's an interesting question. Like, is one the product? Like, which is the chicken and which is the egg? Right? Is it just that there are so many choices now, so you can kind of see that some of the branding things that we thought that's real, like that's a big deal, are not. Right?
Give you a tease?
Please.
It's generational. It's a generational study.
Yeah,
100%.
You really think it is?
Yeah, baby boomers. Right, so greatest generation were extroverts that cared about the community. They accomplished certain things. Mm-hmm. Because they're extroverts that cared about the community, they raised children who are introverts who more care about themselves.
Pendulum swings back.
There's no presidents that came out of the silent generation. Mm-hmm. There's a reason for that. Because their parents raised them like that. Also, that generation is historically the one that philosophers come from. Because they were like that. Boomers, next generation.
They're the cowboys.
They're the cowboys. They're individualistic. They care about themselves, and they're extroverts. That's where you get wealth and these sort of things generation, like what we're seeing kind of in power right now. Mm-hmm. Because they care about themselves and are extroverts, they raise Gen X, who feel ignored because their parents were so cared about themselves that they feel ignored and they feel have to rebel against society and these sort of things.
They're less joiners. They're more.
Yep. They raise millennials who, because Gen X were ignored as kids, they hover their parents. They think, my parents didn't care about me and let me ride a bike without a helmet. I need to just jump on it, right? So that's where a lot of this, like go back to the millennial entitlement thing. That's where it comes from, right? So this all
you were raised by somebody who was
all flows through into the whole.
Now tie that little spiel to brand loyalty. Like, how does that have anything to do with?
Sorry, because the boomers because they were so individual, like cared about themselves. And we were in this economic kind of boom right after kind of the World War and all sorts of. They're like, we want choice. We want what's best for us. We think we're the best. Ego XYZ. Explosion of just choice and all these sort of other things that kind of come with it.
Okay, so that's where.
Sounds like I'm blaming boomers. Not your fault. But.
No, and obviously, like any generational thing, huge grain of salt, right? Like you're talking about.
They've been the majority buying consumer class for the last 40 years. Has been boomers, right? Because X just wasn't as big. Millennials are currently passing boomers in just terms of buying power.
Totally. And there's just more millennials than there are Gen Xers just because of when the baby boom and the baby boom lit and all that stuff. It's an interesting question. Something I think about in terms of like, and obviously like it's one thing to say relatively there's way less brand loyalty, but brands aren't dead by any means. Like they're not gone. Like if I look at my liquor cabinet, like I can see my own prejudices of like.
But they're consolidating, and Cheerios doesn't represent the same amount of the cereal purchases nearly that it did 20, 30 years ago.
Sure. I know, and I buy it. Like I think that there are certainly among young people. I think they would be crazy not to have a growing skepticism about what it means that this has the label that says it's this brand versus that brand. I think that's absolutely real. But
I might be talking complete bullshit. This is work friend conversation, but
absolutely. And I think it's interesting. Like the reason I'm so quick to put a caveat in your thing is just like I think of myself, and I think everyone thinks of themselves as like very like, oh, that branding doesn't work on me. Like, you're wasting your marketing dollars on this guy. I see right through it. But I think everyone thinks of themselves that way, and we are all more of suckers than we know.
100%.
Like we all, like, we don't realize that the reason we bought this beer instead of that beer was a million little messages that got to us.
We all want to, define ourselves and be a part of something. That's natural human society. Whether that's defining yourself by being counterculture or not is a whole different thing, right? So whether you have the punk movement, you have the different sort of, musical movements that have gone on, leading into political movements, the same thing. It's like you're defining yourself by being counter to the, whatever the norm is.
I believe it was Hegel who outlined that every thesis must have an antithesis, and from those two abutting forces, a synthesis would be born, and that synthesis inevitably would become its own thesis, and an antithesis would be born there. Like, anytime you have one group, right, it just makes sense that a group would be formed in opposition to it, right? I'm not using this to get us to the Communist Manifesto, but I think that's a very useful way to think about not only ideas and how ideas change, but also in a very crass way, how businesses work and how business think about Tesla. They're very consciously defining themselves in contrast to more traditional car companies, and I'm sure a million car companies have done that unsuccessfully in the past, but nothing exists outside of context, and in many ways you define yourself to the extent that you agree with X or disagree with it.
So my theory of generations would say that swings back, right? So
that eventually,
because Gen X is kind of growing and they raised us, there's this, right, define yourself by counterculture thing that's happening. The study of generations would say there's a swing that when millennials get into, our 40s, into power, especially politically, there's a swing back to a more community-centered perspective, and we want to be a part of the majority, not define ourselves by the minority.
Because there's got to be something that's some of it is you're in this generation and you're exposed to these stimuli, but some of it has to be you're at this stage of your life, right? I would
every kid doesn't want to be their parents.
Yeah, well, I certainly am different now and have different values than I did when I was 15, right? And I would expect to have different values again when I'm 45. The idea that generations would shift or take the place of not their parents but the generation before, that kind of makes sense, because when you get to be the age that they are, you may have many of the values that they do, and vice versa. I want to pull this kind of into a sense of thinking about businesses, because I think Trader Joe's is an interesting one, because I think you can play this two ways, right? You can say, I'm for the expert, I'm for the boutique customer, I think of
a curated. What's the clothing company that?
You can be
not Jack. There's a clothing company that we pick clothes out for you.
Totally. So that's at one end is you have your trunk club, and then at the other end you have the kind where it's this is for the person who's no, I could be a trunk club. I could pick clothes for other people, and that's with the microbrew. The bar that you go into, and not only does the menu have 100 beers, but it has a paragraph about each beer, because they're selling to someone who says no, I will know about beer if you talk to me about it in a smart way. So talk to me about it in a smart way, because I'm a smart person.
I care enough to learn. I'm not just faking this conversation.
Absolutely, and I think it's a very interesting decision, and it's something important to think about as a brand. If you're Quorn, and we thought about this kind of thing a lot, but just framing this discussion this way, Quorn would often think
what is a vegetarian meat alternative?
Quorn is so it's a food company, frozen fake meat, right? But just by virtue of the product that they are and their history in that market, they are going to want to talk to the person that's out on I'm an expert, I know about this stuff. They might want to be Morningstar.
If you know the difference between three different types of fake hamburgers, we're for you.
Absolutely. And I think the temptation was always to say, well, what's Morningstar doing, and how can we get in on their 80% of the market share? But that maybe is the wrong impossible dream, right? Maybe the best
thing to do is play your lane strong. And if you're Apple, maybe you start out in that lane and you can be so successful that you become the main
The
guy.
old Shark Tank argument, do you want 1% of 80% of the people, or do you want 80% of 1% of the people? Right, and it's a numbers game, but it's a lot easier and financially more responsible to go after the 80% of 1% than the opposite.
Totally. And I mean, I use the corn example because it's a company that I've thought a lot about, but I think no matter where you are, if you're thinking at all about the strategy of your business, you're lying to yourself if you think like, well, right now I'm appealing to the person who really knows about this category and really cares and picks me, you know. Or you're lying to yourself if you're Cheerios and you're like, well, I'm going to appeal to the person who wants the most artisanal, like specific, correct thing. Like it's there's a bit of positioning that you don't get to do. It just
it just happens.
That's how the market is.
But if you look at even all the big companies that are number one in wherever the markets, most of them started off as niche brands,
Totally.
right? As niche, like we have these people, and they're usually lead users. They're usually the people that people go to. Like when I want vegetarian food, I have my strict, vegan friends that I call and say, hey, you got a recipe for whatever. Like if you win those people, they have enough connections and trickle down commodification. I don't know. There's got to be a term for this, right?
Yeah. Sometimes you have like you can get the early adopters, and then you become mass market. But like it's really easy to read history backwards that way.
Of course.
Right? Because like
there's plenty that failed.
The majority of these businesses don't make it to. I became an enduring niche. Much less. I became an enduring niche, and then we became the middle of the market.
That's happening. So, you do not know this. I just spent $50 on 4 bars of chocolate.
Oh man,
that will never be.
You have you can't say something to me that would make me sadder. That
is supposedly the best chocolate in the world. They will never be a major brand. They are a niche. I love chocolate. I love premium chocolate. I don't buy it very
Podcasts should have videos of my face. How
I should have saved that. Oh, man. I knew that was going to piss you off, too.
Oh, the bullshit face, the skepticism face. I don't even know how to
it's total, like, New York hipster, Brooklyn, XYZ.
I am a hipster. That's not making me mad. I'm a hipster that doesn't have $50.
I buy it because of the branding and, like, probably that. I might not actually, but people that know.
Yeah.
I'm trusting experts say it's the best chocolate in the world.
Yeah. Well, I once wrote a contract for $500,000 worth of chocolate. So I know some chocolate.
He also hasn't made it. I bought it for a batch he's going to make about 3 months from now. Oh my God. Does that make you feel better? That's a good place.
He's not.
All right.
He's not making that. This is going to be made by somebody else. Excuse my.
No.
I'm exuberant right now. I'm full of vexation. But he's not going to make that. Somebody else. He's probably rewrapping a Hershey bar.
No, a chocolate company in New York.
You have to import.
A chocolate company in New York got in trouble for rewrapping, like Hershey or some like super cheap. Yeah.
It ain't hard to do.
Putting some like bearded picture on the label.
So I sold fine chocolates, expensive chocolates, right? I'm talking about $2-3 chocolate.
Not my $12.50 per bar.
Almost a $300 markup. And
it was a $50 minimum. That's the only reason I got $50. I would have bought one. I feel like I need to qualify.
I love it. Did you buy it was it an emotional purchase like this person is my homie? Was it more like an experiment, or was it like a present?
Because Seth Godin told me to.
Oh.
You want to go? Different conversation.
I love me some Seth Godin. No, that is hilarious. We should totally do. This will be an ongoing thing because I want you to try this.
I'm so excited.
I'm eager to hear you try this. I'd love for you to do a blind taste test against a merely good chocolate because we all know
$2 bite.
Totally. We all know that bad chocolate is bad.
Yeah.
Not all of us. Maybe a 5-year-old cannot distinguish. But if you have
I have no
any
problem with a good
experience
Hershey
with-
bar. I mean, like, I'm not. I'm
No,
not.
no, no. I'm not.
Oh, you're doing bad chocolate.
A Hershey
Okay.
bar is not bad chocolate.
Got
It's merely middling. A Hershey bar, in fact, is tailored beautifully to the American palate.
Correct.
If you got a Hershey bar that was sold in Belgium, it would taste like delicious, quote-unquote, Belgian chocolate. We can talk about my problems with that particular bit of vocabulary. But anyway, yeah, I would be interested to know if, as you do like a blind taste test. Because so Barry Callebaut, they sell just hundreds of millions of dollars of chocolate all over the world.
They're the low price point.
No.
Oh,
They
okay.
sell everything.
Okay.
Right? Like if you buy a bar of chocolate, it's very possible that chocolate was sourced, made, like all came from Barry Callebaut, and then it got to brand X, Y, or Z, and they melted it into their chocolate bar, they shaped it into their bunny, blah, blah, blah. And I had, the Johnny Walker Blue level of chocolate. I had the red, I had the black. I can't tell you how much time I spent tasting these different chocolates. And it just, diminishing returns hits
Oh, yeah.
so fast. So fast.
I mean,
The only caveat I would offer is that, like wine, right? Like red wine tastes different than white wine, obviously, right? Or like a Chianti tastes different than
Sure.
like a Merlot. So there's some style, right? So you might prefer one style to another, but quality, like the 80-20 rule, just is going to kick you in the butt right about at that $2 chocolate bar. But we
part of me
are
wants
far afield.
to just go to the top. And
Go to the
once
top.
I go to the top, I can stop experimenting, right?
Absolutely.
I can end the game.
I hope that this chocolate is so fantastic.
Do you know
for
the
that
Seth
you
Godin
buy
story?
another one.
I'll give you the
About
30-second and we'll
chocolate,
end it.
yeah.
Yeah. So
Well, we gotta hit our quick hits, brother.
he got in. Well, I know. Man. We'll end this segment.
Okay.
All right.
I feel
So,
like we haven't been talking about.
He's like, I need a hobby, right?
Yeah,
I need something to talk about casually because I'm a kind of socially awkward dude. Gets into fine chocolate, like making it himself, doing all this sort of stuff, buying all these things from different places. Buys this bar of chocolate, stops making chocolate the next day
He's like,
because he's like, they figured it out. They solved the riddle. I will never make chocolate this good. What the hell am I doing? Quit.
Yeah.
The next day. Seth Godin, one of the most put head down. When I'm gonna do something, I'm gonna do it to the 800th degree. Quit the next day after trying this chocolate. I want that experience. We don't have enough of those experiences. in
I
our
have
lives.
nothing mean to say about Seth Godin.
I want a chocolate bar to convince me to never make chocolate in my life,
First of all, you're never gonna make chocolate in your life.
but I want to.
Yeah.
I won't.
The reason to make chocolate is the reason that you would make beer, right?
Yeah.
In a way, you will never make a beer as there's a hard way to describe this, but as precise,
Yes.
as exact, as made to the intention that it was wanted to make as Budweiser,
Yeah.
right?
Okay.
They are experts. If they wanted to make Guinness, they could make the hell out of Guinness.
Yes.
Right? They could make Guinness just right every time, put it on every shelf in America.
Yep.
Right? The reason you make beer is because you learn about beer and you get better at it, and maybe you want to start your own startup, or maybe you just want to try all the different varieties. But in the same way that a Merlot and a Chianti, it's just a matter of preference, right? Once you get to a certain quality, it's just a matter of preference. Yeah, you know what? I heard a guitarist say, and I love this. He was like, a guitarist is like a pretty woman. Once you get to a certain level, it's just a matter of taste, right? You might say, this woman is the most beautiful woman in the world. I might say that woman is the most beautiful woman in the world. But after a certain level, these are extremely beautiful women, and we're just splitting hairs. And the same is true of guitars, and the same is true of beers, and the same... It is my strong opinion, as someone who invested a great deal of time in the subject,
The chocolate
is true of
game.
chocolate. Yes.
Ran that game.
I ran that game. I cannot tell you how much chocolate I've eaten in my life.
I haven't had many life-changing food experiences in my life. I also don't really go to many fancy restaurants. I kind of want that one. It's like
Good.
something to blow
And
my mind.
unlike this Seth Godin character, who, like, I probably have 10 Seth Godin books in the house right now. I love Seth Godin. I was not an amateur, all right? I did this.
I mean, he learned about it. He was making his own. Like, he knew shit.
Whatever, man. I'm sure there's some real great baseball players never made it, you know, but I did this.
You did this.
I ran that chocolate game.
I think I can make... So, this tailors nicely into our third segment. Yeah, so something I want to do on a weekly or per podcast basis.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to pitch you a business idea.
Okay.
It might be a hipster brand of chocolate.
Mm-hmm.
It might be the next Twilight book. We don't know.
Excellent.
It's going to be
Excellent.
completely going in blind. There's a 99.9% chance I will never do any of these.
Mm-hmm.
Listeners, you are welcome to run with it. Full license.
I kind of want to call this segment, like, Steal This Idea.
Steal this idea. Please steal this idea. Because I think all these things need to exist.
Okay.
If nothing else for my entertainment.
But don't think that I'm just going to let you be the pitch.
Oh, you got one too?
Well, I'm going to...
We'll
at
each
some
do one.
point I may.
I got like a bank. All right.
What's the idea?
Here's the idea.
What's the idea?
You're familiar with Blue Apron,
Yes.
right?
Mm-hmm.
Recipe delivery once a week, subscription service, XYZ.
Mm-hmm. They send you the ingredients, you cook the food. Somebody gets that here in my apartment building. So I've seen the box. So
Sure.
I
Great
have that level
food, great recipes, good for them, doing really, really well.
Gotcha.
Do you use recipe sites?
Yeah. When I'm cooking something I don't know how to make, I use recipe sites.
Sure. So you're like, hey, I really want to make, tom yum soup. I'm going to look up what's the best recipe, right? And there's,
Absolutely.
Different Reddits or whatever it may be to say, here's the most preferred.
Yeah,
Tom
there's
yum
like voting. Some of them are up
So
there.
there's ways to figure out, which one sounds right to you. We both work in the grocery store industry.
Did. Now I just write
I still do.
food industry, grocery store.
Here's the concept. I just got done with work. It's 5 o'clock. I gotta go pick up my son from school. God, I have no idea what I gotta make something for dinner, right? What am I gonna do? Wouldn't it be nice if there was a website where I could just log in and it said, hey, we noticed you bought a lot of Mexican food recently. Here's the best taco recipe we can find. Curated for you. Paradox of choice taken out of the mix. I said, yeah, that taco recipe looks really good, but I got cheese at home. I got taco shells. I don't need those things. You just uncheck those boxes, pull up to grocery store, drive through, whatever location it may be, and they just kind of drop in your car. So here's the full business. App that, based on your preferences when you fill out a little survey and your past purchase history, we are going to make recommendations for you, right? We got 2 people at home, we got 3 people at home. Here's recipes that are curated by us to your personal tastes based on what you've bought in the past. You like a lot of hot, spicy things, here's some spicy recipes. Maybe there's 3 different options. I say, there's 3, I want the vegetarian one tonight. I want the healthy one tonight. I'm going on a diet. I'm trying to reduce my calories. Here's a low-calorie option.
You can pick, your lane.
Yeah, and, maybe I want to do it for the whole week. Here's my 4 recipes. Click, click, click. Combines them. Hey, look, 3 of these recipes need milk. Let's get a full gallon instead of a half gallon. And combines those into, here's the total ingredients for these 5 recipes. Uncheck what you don't need. It's an app, so we can put our credit card information in. Hit pick up. I'm going to pick it up at grocery store X between 5:30 and 6. I pull up and say, hey, TJ, they've brought it out to you. Would you pay a premium for that service? Guess what? You don't have to. Here's how we make money on it.
You totally did that in the classic info.
Exactly. I can charge you the same amount of price, if not lower, than a grocery store will. Grocery stores have markup.
But how?
I'm going to sell slots in this recipe. And it's the recommended slots. So, hey, you needed, cheese for those tacos? Hey, Sargento, How much would you pay to be the number one slot in the number one taco recipe? 10 grand, 50 grand, in the number of users.
If you have scale, you can charge whatever the hell.
Right, as someone who works in the food industry and worked for food companies, we would pay a lot of money if there was enough user base for this.
Absolutely.
Now, hey, whoever's going to create this app,
yeah.
The dirty secret behind this, major grocery stores would buy you out in a second because they all, if you ask any grocery store what they're afraid of the most, Amazon.
Yeah.
This is how you compete with Amazon and their drones and 1 hour delivery.
Mm-hmm.
You say, curate recipes for me based on my food, caloric wants, vegetarian, XYZ, gluten, whatever it may be. Make recommendations for me and let me pick it up on my way home from work.
Awesome.
I don't need to take my son into the grocery store. Maybe it's a drive-through facility. The logistics behind it are solvable.
Mm-hmm.
Please, someone do this. So I don't have to take my son to the grocery store anymore.
The value proposition is all about not thinking about what you have to cook for dinner.
Yes.
Because that's worse than FOMO.
How much time do we spend in our lives trying to decide, texting our significant others, hey, what do you want for dinner? I don't care. How about this? I'm not in the mood for that.
Totally. No, the app says we're making lasagna, No, and I'm about to have that conversation right now. Right? I'm about to do that. And I would love to have that. And also, so there's a value proposition in it's obviously going to be cheaper than a Blue Apron, right? Especially if...
Probably going to be cheaper than a grocery store, if done correctly.
And it's going to be healthier too, right? Because you're making it at home.
So if you're a grocery store chain, you could probably offer a discount versus their normal in-store stuff to get the people that normally shop at Kroger to go to Walmart or to go to a different store. If you're the only store with this option, I will go a mile out of my way so I don't have to go spend an hour in a grocery store.
Totally. The time savings is there, and also if so if you don't work in the grocery industry, what you probably don't realize is that brands subsidize their deals. So if you go to the grocery store and Cheerios is 50 cents cheaper than it usually is, that's probably Cheerios paid that money to get cheaper that way. So if you are a recipe, right, and your brand is in the recipe, I'm sure brands would fight to give you that money to make up that price difference, right? So in the same way that you would pay Kroger to run a deal, I'm sure you would pay Kroger the same thing to get to be the cheese in their recipe. I keep saying cheese.
There's two ways to logistically do this. The obvious is through a grocery store, right? You put someone in a grocery store and they buy the things as needed, and they create little bags for people as they pull up. Mm-hmm. The stores would probably offer a discount for that because you're driving traffic to their stores. You're driving sales through those stores. If not them, then the brands will do it.
Yeah, they totally
Option B, which is more interesting but more capital intensive, is you buy an old shut down Taco Bell facility.
And
you have 3 recipes or whatever it is. You have a limited selection that you need because you're curating these recipes. You don't need much in that facility, and you just shuffle cars through. I think it'd be more of a Sonic pull up than a true drive-through window. But there's a separate facility outside our grocery store option, much more capital intensive.
Yeah, I like the first one better, just because I always found the kind of go to the frozen pizza store where they have the fancy frozen pizza, buy it, and then go cook it at home yourself. That never appealed to me, and I feel like it would be easier for me to say this is the same.
Here's the 5 ingredients.
This is the jewel I always go to. I know they're going to pick it up there. I know right where it is. And it's not just, they have everything, so presumably you can have more recipes there. But it's a cool idea. I thought you were going to come with something a little bit more weird and wacky for this.
I'm saving that. This is the one I actually want to have somebody go do. So don't worry. Next week I'll go my
weird and wacky.
I'll give you my theory of serialized Twilight podcast.
Fantastic. Thanks for tuning in to Work Friends Podcast. I'm Casey.
I'm TJ.
And we will see you next time. Have a good weekend.